Yo, what is happening, guys? It's Jim Cody, and I'm joined once again by these guys, the Wonder Twins, Andy and Vince. And they're in the house together today because Vince came into town this week because it's their birthday. So wish them happy birthday, whoever's watching. And me and Vince had a good day hanging out today. It's been a while since me and him just been able to hang out. Andy had to work, unfortunately. Otherwise, he probably would have joined us as well.
Yep.
And we had a pretty good day at the comic store and drinking beer and eating pizza and all that good stuff. So that was a lot of fun. But tonight, we're going to be talking more about the Lord of the Rings, specifically the Fellowship of the Ring. And we're going to be talking about chapters 7 through 12, which we read the last couple of weeks. Funny enough, like every time I read Lord of the Rings, there's been a lot of times I've read Lord of the Rings and never finished it, of course. I just kind of pick it up and just start reading it. And this is usually around the time I kind of drop out for whatever reason. Well, usually I get through, chapter 12, and then I start like tuning out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But these are all really good. This is probably one of my favorite parts of Fellowship of the Ring. And so let's just jump right into it. So chapter 7 is in the house of Tom Bombadil. Of course, at the end of chapter 6, we kind of get introduced to Tom Bombadil, but chapter 7 is all about Tom Bombadil, and he takes the hobbits back to his enchanted grove, I suppose, in the house. And we kind of learn about this very mysterious character, Tom Bombadil. And like I said last time, we probably have a lot to say about Tom Bombadil because he is a very interesting character in Lord of the Rings and in Tolkien because he's very mysterious. What his purpose is, what he can do. He seems like a very powerful character right off of the get-go. But it's also his power seems pretty limited to the space he exists around. He doesn't really seem to leave that space very often. It seems like he can, but it doesn't seem like he does very often. But we're introduced to him and his wife, Goldberry. And yeah. What else do we want to talk about here? Chapter 7, Tom Bombadil.
Well, just like I don't know, 'cause, like you said, he's just like, what is he? As far as the powers that he has and everything. But I think I made the note of like, who is he? Question mark. I mean, and Tom keeps saying, well, Goldberry says he is like,
Right.
Then, later, whatever that means. And then later, Frodo even asks him again, like, now who are you? And Tom's like, you haven't learned my name yet. I'm Tom Bombadil. I am me. And then at that point, Tom goes. There's this long paragraph of him saying, he was here before the rivers and trees. He made the paths for men, and goes on about like he was here before the Dark Lord came from outside.
Right. Yeah. So he's from what they're saying here, he's just about as old as anything, if not older than anything. He's a very interesting character, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the point of his character is really. He doesn't really add anything to the story, or it's not really. I guess what it adds to the story is it's kind of like a safe haven. It's like the first of many of the safe havens throughout the story, right? Like, there's these points in the story where it's a little dark and dreadful, and then we have like a safe haven and they can rest and relax and then go back on their dark and dreadful adventure, right? And I guess Tom is kind of that character.
Yeah. It's, and there's a lot of like fan theories out there as far as like who he is. Some saying that, he could be a Iluvatar from the Silmarillion, as far as being
for
God
sure,
walking the earth. But
it's very, very possible. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know like Tolkien himself just kind of never answered it, just left him as a mysterious character. And he grabs the ring from Frodo, and it grows in size as he's holding it, and then he does a little trick of the hand to make it disappear, and Frodo kind of freaks out, and he gives it back to him, and then Frodo then at that point puts it on, or Tom puts it on first. Sorry.
Right. It doesn't affect him.
And it doesn't affect him. Yeah. And then after that, Frodo puts it on. And I made a note that's, other than Bilbo using the ring, this is the first time we've seen the ring used in the book. And
right.
See that it doesn't work, at least in this, in the house of Tom Bombadil.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. The whole bit with the ring and Tom Bombadil, it's pretty interesting. And the other interesting thing about Tom Bombadil is it seems like whatever his power is, which is very unclear, affects everything around him.
Yeah.
He makes everything kind of better.
Yeah.
Or, they talk about like the plants and the animals, and obviously I think it's later in this chapter we meet he gives the hobbits a pony.
Yes.
And the pony's like extremely intelligent. Here we go again with, very intelligent animals, which might not be special to it might not be from Tom Bombadil.
Yeah.
Of course, we already know that in Middle-earth there are animals that are a little bit more sentient than other animals, and we get introduced to more of those later on in the stories of Lord of the Rings. So I don't know if that's an effect from living around the enchanted home of Tom Bombadil, or if it's just he's just an enchanted creature or whatnot that's attracted to Tom Bombadil. But it definitely seems like a place that's like I don't think any dark power could penetrate this place.
Yeah,
which is pretty interesting.
Well, and it's interesting that he's sandwiched between the Old Forest and the Barrow Wights, like two of the most, so far in the story. I mean, we hear about the Barrows, the Downs in this chapter, but it's interesting that these two pretty dangerous places are one just right outside the Shire, but then Tom is also right in between them.
Right. Yeah.
And I had mentioned in the previous stream about, again, the power of language and words. There's more of that's carried over from the last chapters. In the last chapter, Tom singing to release the hobbits from Old Man Willow.
Yeah.
And as soon as they get to his house, it's still nighttime, and Frodo's asking who Old Man Willow is, and both Merry and Pippin freak out. They're like, no, don't talk about that right now, because it's nighttime. And Tom says, he says, that's right. Some things are ill to hear when the world's in shadow, and that right now is the time for rest, and we'll speak more on it in the morning.
Right. So the same kind of theme we saw in the the second chapter there, where Gandalf and Frodo are having the first discussion about the ring.
Yeah.
And, Gandalf says the same thing. We'll wait till morning to talk about, these dark things, because, these things have more power at night.
Yeah.
So obviously that's it's a literal thing. It's not just a what would you call it? A metaphor or whatever. It's a real thing, that it has real power.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Tom Bombadil definitely has power with words and song, and he's always singing, of course. And apparently, that's might be partially where his abilities come from, whatever those may be. But he is a very interesting character because he doesn't really have any point in the story.
Yeah, I think he only.
But he
I was gonna say he only comes up. He's mentioned later on.
Yeah.
During the Council of Elrond, he's brought up during that. But other than that, it's weird because this chapter he's set up as if he's going to be a player later on in the story, and he just never is.
Yeah.
Well,
I feel like it might have been something that, not everything has to have a purpose in the story, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just he's just a character in the story, and it's just an interesting little bit, and it's never bothered me. Lord of the Rings is full of all those moments, and we'll run into more moments where they're not quite needed to continue the story, but it's still interesting nonetheless. And I also think, Tolkien just it was probably just some character he created and really enjoyed and just wanted to insert him into it. I get the feeling this is probably one of those characters he created before he even, way before he even thought of the Lord of the Rings, or probably at the very beginning conceptions of Middle Earth. Like, this is one of those characters he created, or maybe wrote some stories about that we've never read or whatever, and just kind of inserted in here because he liked it so much. It kind of feels that way to me.
But he's very much, Tolkien having a history like fairy tale and stuff like that. This is very much like a fairy tale character.
Yeah, very much.
From his big yellow boots and his hat and all of that to the singing and talking in rhyme. And for me, unless you had anything about the chapter.
I didn't want to slow down conversation. I don't think so. Y'all probably covered everything. Who's on the ring? Nothing happens.
Oh, we hadn't talked about the time displacement.
Oh yeah. What about the dreams?
We hadn't mentioned the dreams yet. Yeah, we get.
Well, Mitch,
Frodo has the second dream where we get a nice description of what he's seeing, and it's basically a description of. I don't know, as a first-time reader, if I knew, but it's basically a description of Gandalf trapped at Isengard, and the eagles coming and taking him away.
Yeah, I guess it's a question of if he's seeing it happen, or if he's seeing what's about to happen, like as far as when everything takes place.
So, do you think these dreams we know are happening? They're real. And he has more dreams later, and we already talked about one of them before. Do you think these dreams are a natural gift of Frodo, or do you think they're coming from the ring? Because I think they're an extension of the ring.
I think so.
That's what I feel. Because he doesn't really... Well, we don't get Frodo's sleeping habits prior to having the ring, but... But I think it is an extension of the ring. And I mean, Merry and Pippin end up having nightmares while they're there, but that could just be trauma from being eaten by a tree.
Sure.
The day before. And then Sam just sleeps peacefully through the night. But I think Frodo, because in the next chapter it starts with another dream of Frodo's, which.
Right. We can move on to that. I think we pretty much talked about Tom Bombadil and everything. I mean, it's the same kind of things, all of us Lord of the Rings fans talk about with Tom Bombadil is, he's just a very mysterious and interesting character. And of course, it's all just fan theories as to what he really is and why he's there and where he came from and why he, I think the most fascinating thing about him, and everybody agrees, is how the ring doesn't affect him.
Mhm.
And, Tolkien makes a big point of that. But yeah, moving on, Fog on the Burrow Downs. This is where they wake up from the house of Tom Bombadil, and they decide that they're going to skirt by the Burrow Downs on their way to Bree. That's the plan. Of course, Tom warns them not to go, to the Burrows.
Yeah, this is where it gets creepy.
It gets extremely creepy.
Yeah.
This part's really, really interesting and really cool.
Yeah.
This is the kind of stuff I really love about Lord of the Rings, is all the little lore. He doesn't fully explain, but it's this really cool, like, you can tell it's thought out, right? But he's not going to tell you all this exposition about,
Mhm.
who these. Well, anyways, let's talk about the dream first. So the chapter opens with a dream. So
Yeah, and basically what's described is kind of a premonition. I mean, he's dreaming of the sea again, like he had in the first dream with the towers leading out to the sea, and it feels like a premonition of what's to come as a ring bearer. As far as, I mean, we all know what's going to happen to him.
Yeah.
At the end of it, but he's seeing this now, whether he's aware of it or not. It is weird because I don't know of anything else like this in the book, that to get this so early on and it be in the first book and not pay off, to the very, very end for the last one.
That's something you would
early foreshadowing.
To be honest, like, if we weren't sitting here like analyzing it, it's something I forget every time
Mhm.
and don't really piece together. Like, I wouldn't remember this by the time I get to the end of, Return of the King. Of course, we've all read Lord of the Rings multiple times at this point, so we can connect all those dots together. But yeah. Yeah. So, again, with the dreams, and then we get to the Burrow Downs.
Yeah, I think my note is Tolkien goes full horror.
He does. This part is scary, dude. Like,
Yeah.
even as an adult, like, reading this, every time I read it, I'm like, man, this is some like terrifying shit.
Yeah.
Like, this is some dark, terrifying. This might be one of the scariest parts in all of the whole trilogy.
Yeah.
Where the hobbits get drawn into the burrows, and then they wake up, and they're basically, it's like the ultimate nightmare that is in horror movies and stuff, where you're trapped in a coffin underground and still alive. It's the same kind of thing, but this is they're trapped in a burial mound.
Yeah. And
essentially,
the build up,
yeah,
and the build up to it, as far as them wandering down to this just monolith, sticking up out of the ground, and it was even though knowing what's going to happen, it was like an eerie description of when they rest against it to basically go to sleep. You would think after everything they would just be like, hey, maybe we should keep walking, but they make the mistake of like, we're good, let's eat and take a nap. But it says the sun doesn't even warm up this stone, so it's like,
right, yeah,
there's something creepy there. And then just the description of the fog rolling in over the mounds, and they get separated one by one and picked off, and there's a description of, because Frodo goes ahead of everyone else, and then it says that the white, the barrel white, it says it leaned over him, and Frodo thought that there were these two eyes just like, out in front of him, and then he gets this cold grip, grabs him, and then doesn't remember anything until he's waking up in the mound with his friends laying there with a sword across their neck and stuff.
Yeah, it's very, very creepy stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very creepy stuff. It's Tolkien does go full horror here. I don't remember if I think he does go into some description about who these kings are, right, in the burrows, and I can't quite remember the whole story behind it, but I do remember a little bit of exposition there, like a little hints as who these people are and whatever. What's interesting though is even the hobbits are aware that they're there or have heard stories about it.
Yeah.
And most of them have never even seen them before, because they talk about it when they go to the old forest and they get on top of the hill and kind of looking out where they are and trying to find their way when they get lost in the forest and they see, the Burrow Downs. And so they know what they are. At least, there's like whispered rumors, these old myths and stories that have been carried on for centuries and centuries. And even the hobbits, know little whispers of those tales. Maybe not the full story, but it's quite cool and interesting. I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting that the Downs and the Old Forest are like literally right next to the Shire. It's like the most peaceful place in all of Middle Earth is right next to like the two creepiest places outside of Mordor in Middle Earth.
Well, I don't know if I'd say that. There's probably some creepier places in Middle Earth, but yeah, it is really interesting that right on the borders of the Shire is this like terrifying place haunted by wights, that are, yeah. So that's really cool and interesting. And
it makes me wonder if because their way out of this is to call for Tom Bombadil.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, like, when Tolkien wrote it, did he write himself into a corner? Like, did he initially just have the hobbits like go through the old forest and then end up getting trapped by a Barrow Down or the Barrow Wights and be like, "How am I going to get out of this?"
Yeah, no, that's actually a good point. I never thought about that. That's a good point, and maybe that's why he wrote in. Maybe that's the point of Tom Bombadil, is to get them out of this situation. He wanted to include, the Wights and the Burrow Downs and all that, but he needed some way for them to get out. It's almost comic book logic.
Yeah.
you needed some extraordinary means for them to escape. Otherwise, it just wouldn't make any sense, right?
Yeah, because Frodo does like get to attack the Wight and cut its arm, but like in the process, it doesn't really amount to much. It just pisses it off.
Right. No, I never thought about that. Yeah.
And I had made a note that because Frodo gets the urge to put the ring on.
He does put the ring on.
Well, yeah, and ultimately does, but he has the thoughts of like, oh, I can run while I'm running away. I'll mourn my loss of my friends.
Yeah,
and I feel that that's not necessarily Frodo's thoughts, but more of the ring, self-preservation of the ring itself. Like, it doesn't want to get lost. It doesn't want Frodo to die here and get lost in these wights where it can never get back to where it needs to go. So it needs Frodo to make it out of here. I don't know if the ring actually is what gives him the courage to attack the Wights and then call for Tom Bombadil, but I think it is one of the driving forces of him being like, I can just leave. Like, Gandalf will understand, and it'll be fine. But then it's like, well, wait a minute, that's a bad idea. Like, these are my friends.
Yeah.
So he's kind of preserving that fellowship. That we ultimately, the fellowship is what is greater than the power of the ring at the end of the day.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and that's a huge theme in Tolkien stories.
Yeah.
Is, friends, fellowship, and friends helping friends out. And really, as we'll see at the very end, it's the friend who really saves the day, right?
Oh yeah.
So, it's people sticking together, and that's the only way. It's not a lone hero going off. We're about to meet a real badass hero too here, and he's not the one that saves the day. That's what's really interesting about the story. And also, it's not the hero. The hero of the story is Frodo, but at the very end of the story, spoiler alert, he's not the one, who ultimately accomplishes this ultimate task, right? It's through his help of his friend and friends that he's able to do so, and all of them join together. And of course, that's tested throughout the whole book too. Things get hard, and you find out. I mean, that's a really great real life parable too. You know,
Mhm.
things get hard, and when things get hard, you really know who your real friends are.
Oh yeah.
You know, and those are far and few between. But you know, yeah, it's tested here. Of course, you know
Mhm.
that crosses across like Frodo's mind.
Yeah. Well, me and
Um,
Andy had the discussion of like, I guess it's a little off topic, but as far as like, does the Lord of the Rings go into like, does it follow
Oh, the hero's journey.
the hero's journey? It's like Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, and in a way it does, but also doesn't because
yeah,
like because Frodo wouldn't be the farmer boy taken from his world. It would be Sam. Sam's the gardener and
Mhm.
is, you know, he had, and in fact, it's Gandalf that tells him, "Oh, you're going to go on this journey with him." And
Right.
so he's tested, and he's like, "Oh no, I don't want to go. This has changed my life," and like that stuff like that. But ultimately, I don't think it follows it at all.
No, well, I think part of the reason for that is Tolkien didn't care. He
Yeah.
didn't give a shit about the hero's journey. You know, like
Yeah.
he was just writing. He was writing the story he wanted to tell,
Oh yeah, yeah.
which is, you know, nowadays I mean, he had obviously read all these great tales and stories, and but this is I mean, that's what made Lord of the Rings great. It's a very different kind of story.
Mhm.
Even by today's standards, there's nothing quite anything like it. You know, I don't know if you can quite emulate it, you know, and be successful. It's kind of hard to do, and part of it's due to many factors, of course. One, you know, Tolkien wasn't really a novelist, you know, so he had a very different conception of how to write a book. You know, but there's other factors involved too. I don't think he wanted to write a book that was predictable and, you know, followed the same beats as every other epic, but at the same time he did. You know, there are a lot of elements in there that are very familiar
Mhm.
to all these old stories and poems and things that we're familiar with. But he did, you know, um, he did definitely go against the expectations, you know, in the whole story and grand scheme of things. So, but no, you're right. It really doesn't follow all the beats of the hero's journey. And that is an interesting point because this is probably, you know, one of the best example. I mean, this is considered the greatest epic fantasy story ever written, and it doesn't really follow those beats per se. You know, it
Mhm.
kind of diverges off of that path many times. So yeah, no, that's a great point and something I never thought about. But anyways, so at the end of this chapter, of course, Tom Bombadil comes in again, right?
Mhm.
And kind of saves the day. And we move on to the next chapter where they finally get to Bree. They get on their way.
I do have one anecdote. When Tom goes back in, gets treasure and loot, and like gives the hobbits their daggers, they put them on, and they find them extremely uncomfortable. And that it makes note to say that like the hobbits never thought that they were going to need weapons on this journey.
Sure.
Which is wild. It's like you've been attacked twice now.
Well, they're not. Yeah, no, that's a good point too. But you know, the Hobbit society, they're just not used to that. They don't have violence, and they haven't had violence and wars in a long time. You know, so I mean, they do mention the Bounders. I think it's in the earlier chapters, which we didn't bring up, which are kind of they don't go into great detail what they are, but I assume they're kind of like the sheriffs that patrol the borders of the Shire, but they don't really even need to do that because they have the great hedge and they have the old forest, and they think that that's going to protect them enough from anything that's.
I think too they have this romanticized idea of what an adventure is.
That too, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's true. I mean they have weapons and stuff in the Shire, but they use them as decoration and as antiquities in their museum. So they don't even like have a thought of like violence and stuff that way.
Yeah. there's just not that's not a thing, like just that. I mean, there's no wars in the Shire, or hasn't been for seems like centuries.
Yeah.
So yeah, all that's just forgotten tales and myth, and they don't. They're very naive to how dangerous the outside world really is. They think it's just going to be a stroll in the park, and the worst of it's probably the old forest where you're just going to get lost.
Well, I guess
But in
too.
fact, there's far worse things.
Yeah. Well, and then most people think Bilbo's his tailing of his adventure is a bunch of hogwash, anyways. Like,
That's
oh,
true.
that old crack Bilbo, he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah. And he's just highlighting the fun parts
Yeah,
in his tales.
I doubt he goes into.
He didn't talk about. I'm sure he didn't talk about the Battle of Aquarmes.
Yeah,
No, he probably did, but everybody just thought he was full of shit.
Yeah.
It's just like the old man telling you stories at the bar or whatever. He's telling you big fish stories, right? And you're like, all right, yeah, sure. You believe like half of what he's saying.
yeah,
And I think that's probably how the other hobbits. Well, it's obvious that's how the other hobbits view Bilbo, right? He's just a crackpot. He's a nice crackpot, but he's a crackpot,
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, but that is a good point about the weapons. And in the next, moving on to the next chapter, at the sign of the Prancing Pony, this is where we get to Bree. We learn about not just Bree, we also get hints that there's, well, not hints, they make it obvious that there's 2 other villages around Bree, I believe, Archit, and what's the other one? I can't think of it right now.
Yeah, I didn't make a note of it.
Combe. Archit and Combe. And is there one more? Is there, or is that the only other 2?
That.
Anyways, it's not that
Yeah.
important, but there's 2 or 3 other little like hamlets around Bree. The interesting thing, we start get the idea that Estrogoth, the Wilderland, as most people call it, between basically this whole area of West Middle Earth, west of the Misty Mountains, is pretty desolate.
Yeah.
There's not many people that live here, if any people that live here. They make a very big point that the people of Bree are just about the only humans who live here, this side of the Misty Mountains, other than the Rangers. We learned, this is the first time we learned about the Dunedain, the Rangers. Now they don't call them Dunedain here; they just call them Rangers. Later on, we learn a little bit more about them. We learn a little bit, we get little hints about it.
Yeah.
But that whole like desolation of this area really fascinates me, and really fascinated me when I first read it. I was like, there's nobody that lives here, like where are all the people? It's what happened to all the people here?
We get little hints of the old kingdom and stuff that was there as when they in the next couple of chapters, and yeah, it's interesting. There's just nothing out there.
Yeah, and the people of Bree are obviously probably, they don't make them clear what kind of like human stock they come from, but that they're a different human stock than you would find like in Rohan or Gondor.
Yeah.
And they're not quite, they're probably partially the descendants of, this Western kingdom, the Northern kingdoms. But they're also probably some mix of some people from somewhere else. Regardless, they're unique people to this region, and there's not many of them. They just live here in Bree and Combe and Archit, and that's really it. That's like the only sign of civilization here, other than, and that's crazy to think about, like this whole huge swath of land, and you've only got like the people of Bree, you've got the hobbits, you've got the elves, and you do have the dwarves in the Blue Mountains, and but there's not many of any of those populations. So yeah, it's just desolate, broken Wilderland, and it's almost like post-apocalyptic over here.
It really is.
And yeah, I always found that really fascinating. But anyways, that point aside, we get to Bree. They go to Bree. They go to the inn of the Prancing Pony. And it's, you know, there they basically they meet the innkeep Butterbur, but they also get their first glimpse of Strider.
Mhm.
And the description of Strider is really cool, and pretty much straight out. You know, the movie took that straight out of the book. I thought that's one of the parts, like, because we've been comparing the films to the book.
Mhm.
That's one part that the films got perfect. It's like straight out of the pages of the book where he's like smoking on his pipe, and you just see the light of his eyes
Yeah,
under,
the hood.
under his weathered hood.
Yeah.
And they did that like perfect. That's exactly how I imagined it reading the book. And Strider is probably my favorite character. Just saying. He, you know, Aragorn's always been my favorite since I was a kid. He probably still is my favorite. Now, we don't really get introduced to Aragorn Strider. Of course, right now we only know him as Strider because that's what he's known as in these parts. We get more about him in the next chapter, but we get introduced to him here. And the interesting thing is, in this chapter, he's threatening. You know, he might be one of the enemy. You know, so it kind of leaves you hanging there, like that this might not. He might not be a good guy, right? He might be one of the enemy. He might be working for the enemy or whatever. And he seems kind of threatening. He comes off kind of swarthy, and even the people Bree don't really like him or trust him. You know, like, when in fact, you know, we learn later that he's the only reason probably Bree's around. You know? He's the only reason these people are like, well, him and the other Rangers are the only reason like these people can exist in peace here, is because the Rangers are out there, you know, keeping away all the bad shit in the wilderness.
Yeah. At
But
the beginning of the chapter, so when they, you know, enter the gates after talking to the guy at the gate who's asking them, you know, where they're going and stuff, and they go, as they walk past, it mentions a dark figure jumping over the fence.
yeah.
I had always assumed that it was a rider, and then Andy was like, "Oh no, that's Strider jumping in."
Yeah, Strider.
And I don't know why I always just assumed it was one of the Black Riders hopping the fence, but
yeah,
you know, that blew my mind. I was, oh, that makes more sense that it would be Strider. And then Strider, I mean, Strider mentions later when they're talking, like, I saw you, like, he had been following them and patrolling and saw them leave the old forest, and
he'd been stalking them since then.
Yeah.
And they didn't even know, you know.
Yeah, I was trying to wonder when he started following them. It mentions later that he heard them talking to Tom Bombadil. So at the very least, after the Barrow Downs, if not in the Old Forest as well.
Yeah, it's very possible. Yeah. Obviously, he was told. We learn we're kind of combining two chapters together here, and we might as well.
Yeah, I mean,
both of these chapters kind of do just tie together. So we're talking about At the Sign of the Prancing Pony and Strider, and they do kind of tie together. So might as well just tie them together and talk about it. And a lot of it is about Strider and introducing his character. And we learn what happened. We kind of learn where Gandalf is, because Gandalf was supposed to be there, and he's not.
Yeah,
and,
that's kind of the major story beat here, is that
right.
He was supposed to be there, and then he left a message to be mailed, and it didn't get mailed.
Yeah.
And nobody has heard of Gandalf, or has seen or heard from him since, like, the summer. And I think it's like mid-October right now in the story.
Yeah.
It's also, I thought it was really cool how all these big characters, you know, that wander around the world like Gandalf, everybody knows them as, they have a different name everywhere they go.
Yeah.
I can't remember off the top of my head if the people of Bree do necessarily. I think they call him something, right? Specifically, other than, they call him Gandalf, but they also call him something else. I could be mistaken, but
I only remember them calling him Gandalf. I think it's other people call him Mithrandir and
he's got a couple other names.
Stormcrow, but
like Aragorn is an example of that, where, you know, the people around here call him Strider.
Longshanks,
yeah, that's another one. Yeah. So, you might be right about Gandalf. I can't quite remember right now, but that's really cool and interesting, you know. that Gandalf has all these different names where he wanders around.
Mhm.
But yeah, Gandalf leads a letter and pretty much tells them, he's off, he's busy, to make for Rivendell. That's the only place they're going to be safe for now, and he will meet them in Rivendell whenever he can, and that he has a friend looking for them, Strider,
Yeah.
Aragorn,
Yeah.
and that you'll know who he is. I forget exactly. I think he mentions the sword, right?
And that's how you the sword.
Yeah.
And the whole the poem or song or whatever that revolves around the the broken sword.
Yeah.
Yeah. He says, "You may meet a friend of mine on the road, a man lean, dark, tall, by some called Strider. He knows our business and will help you. Make for Rivendell. There, I hope we may meet again. If I do not come, Elrond will advise you."
And of course, I'm going to let you read, but this is where we get one of the most famous quotes that everybody quotes from Lord of the Rings. So,
right. You see him on the back of Jeeps and everything else. He says, "Yours in haste, Gandalf." And then he says, "P.S. Do not use it again. Not for any reason whatsoever. Do not travel by night," meaning the ring. And then he says, "P.P.S. Make sure that it is the real Strider. There are many strange men on the roads. His true name is Aragorn." And then he has the poem of "All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither. Deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken. A light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be the blade that was broken. The crownless again shall be king." And he says, "P.P.P.S. I hope Butterbeer sends this promptly a worthy man, but his memory is like a lumber room. Things wanted always buried. If he forgets, I shall roast him. Farewell."
We never heard of Butterbur again.
Right.
Yeah.
And as Gandalf or Frodo's reading this, he's reading it to himself. So he's not reading it out loud, because later when Strider, they're asking him, like, how can we know? And Strider, he says the poem himself.
Mhm.
And Frodo's like, "Oh, wait, this is you, is who this poem is about." And he said,
Something along the lines, the poem goes with the name or something like that.
yeah.
And he shows them the sword.
And he pulls the sword out because Sam is entirely suspicious of him the entire time.
Yeah.
And doesn't trust him until he pulls the sword out.
Which is Narsil.
Yes.
Which is a big change from the movie. Because in the movie, he's got another long sword. Not a bastard sword. It's a long sword.
Mhm.
He's got a long sword, and it's not broken or anything. It's not Narsil in the movie. But in the book, it's actually Narsil, and it's just the hilt of the sword, which is interesting that's what he carries with him. He just carries that around, as opposed to, an actual, he could have a backup sword, but he doesn't have that,
That just makes him even more badass, that he's wandering these dangerous woods with a busted sword.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm sure.
I'm sure, even though he doesn't say it, I always imagine him to have other weapons on him.
Definitely.
I mean, he probably does have another sword on him, or at the very least, like some daggers or a bow or something. I'm pretty sure
he's
he has
got to have a bow.
Yeah.
He makes mention that he's a decent hunter,
Right.
so he's got to be hunting something.
But the broken sword parts is pretty interesting, and it does make him even more of a badass, because the things he's done, and he's done all that with a broken ass sword. Well, we learn later. We've already know a little bit, because Gandalf's told us in the previous chapters that Aragorn was the one that helped him find Gollum, and we learned some more exploits about Aragorn later on.
Mm-hmm. I have a side note from the main story is Merry in all of this, because he chooses to hang back and not go to the common room or anything, which I find extraordinarily fascinating at the beginning of the book with Merry. Like, he seems like he knows about all of this going on. Like, he's
Yeah.
familiar with the woods and the downs, and his folks. He says his folks have gone to Bree. I don't know if it means he's necessarily been there before, but he's either worldly or he's a know-it-all that hasn't actually done anything.
There was like some huge fucking commotion that just happened outside. I'm not sure what that was. It sounded like I'm not too worried about it, but
Is that on your end?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you guys could hear that. It was pretty loud. It sounded
No.
like a car running into another car outside.
Oh.
I don't know. Anyways, I'm not too concerned about it. But yeah. Back to the book. One thing we forgot to mention is the whole reason Strider knows it's Frodo is because of the incident with the ring.
Yes. Oh, and he's going by the name of Underhill.
Right.
As well. But yeah, Frodo gets drunk, starts singing, and the crowd's like, "Hey, sing that same song over again." So
Well, he starts singing to keep to keep Pippin from spilling the beans.
yes. Yeah.
And to backtrack a little bit more, they check in under Underhill and party and stuff like that. And of course, all the other local hobbits are like, they got to get to know them. These are traveling hobbits from the Shire. They need news from the Shire, what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And the cover story is that they're out there to learn about other hobbits outside of the Shire.
Yes.
And Frodo's writing a book about them and about hobbits in general.
Yeah, and we already learned that there's hobbits here in Bree. And actually, they were probably the first hobbit settlers. So, like the original like hobbit settlers, because we learned this in the prologue, that they settled around Bree. So, yeah, there are hobbits here.
Aren't there
so
hobbits
they
hobbits that go by like their name is Underhill as well?
Yeah, they're Underhill, and they just take him in as a distant cousin. But it's funny because he says he's writing a book, and he as the night goes on, they're talking to everybody and stuff, and they're giving them information. He's not writing any of it down. It points out that he hasn't taken any notes, so like his story's already flimsy.
Mm-hmm.
And then he just goes and sits over in the corner for a good amount of time until Strider starts talking to him, and then Pippin starts chatting it up,
Mm-hmm.
and that's when Strider's like, "You better go do something, or he's gonna tell you say your name."
Yeah.
And so then he runs over there and sings the song. Yeah.
I mean, there's not much to other than just explaining what happened there, but I thought it was worth rewinding for a minute just to to explain. It is important to point out that that's the whole reason Strider already knows. I mean, I think he already knows who he is. He probably 90% sure, but this is like foolproof. Now he knows.
Well, and then we know with Mary being gone from everything, and while he was out walking the yards, he gets attacked by the riders,
Right.
and passes out from is it the Black Speech or Black Breath,
Dark breath or
something like that.
Yeah.
And when Frodo does put the ring on, it's Ted Sandyman and his accomplice end up leaving. I guess to talk. Is it Ted Sandyman?
Bill Farney.
Bill Farney. Yeah.
And it says another sketchy figure from the South or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and they leave and I guess to go talk to the Black Riders who have been there.
Yeah.
And then while Strider and all them are up in the room talking, Nob finds Mary outside, passed out.
Yeah, and those two swarthy men we were talking about, they're worth mentioning too, because this is like the first taste we get of like people that are probably under the influence of Mordor. They may or may not be. They may not. They may just be. I've always kind of had the idea that were already kind of swarthy individuals, and maybe they were promised gold or some kind of wealth or something for any information, or that they've become like full on servants of the enemy now. But yeah,
I think
this is kind of the
at
first
the very
taste.
least, yeah, I think at the very least they're open to suggestion, and the writers are
More open to
offering some type of reward for information and stuff, so they'll gladly
Yeah.
take it.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, yeah, Mary goes off on his own. He gets, molested by the Black Riders. And then, of course, we know there's Black Riders here now in town. And then, of course, I guess this kind of bleeds into the next chapter, which is Knife in the Dark.
Mm-hmm. I had forgotten going into this chapter. I guess mainly because of the movies, from watching those so much, that we don't leave in the movies. We don't leave Bree. Once we're there, the story just goes forward. But this starts with us back in Crick Hollow.
Yeah. We
Yeah,
kind of get a. And yeah, it's most of the Black Riders are over there because they,
Mhm.
everybody, they've been running around the Shire collecting information, and everybody's told them that basically Frodo's gone to live in Crick Hollow, so they surround Crick Hollow, and Fatty Bulger's there, trying to.
The fifth beetle.
Yeah, I mean, and he's trying to keep up the illusion that whatever, but he's pretty much defenseless against all these Black Riders and runs for his life, right?
Yeah, it says he runs like a mile away.
Yeah, for good reason.
Yeah. This is the first time, aside from switching from Bilbo's point of view to Frodo's, that the story shifts to a different location, to a different person.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have this happen later as the party breaks up in the other books, but yeah, this is the first time.
Yeah, this becomes a very common thing, especially once we get to the next book. Like the very next book, not book 2 of Fellowship of the Ring, but in to Two Towers, it goes back and forth a lot. Like it's like every other chapter we're going to a different, but it keeps it manageable always. You don't get lost. It's not like Game of Thrones or something where it's jumping around all over the place. But
yeah, does it say how many of the writers are there?
I'm pretty sure it did. I want to say it's 4 of them.
Okay. I was just curious as to, because it was hard to keep track reading in the future chapters about exactly how many we're pursuing this whole time.
Yeah, I think it does give a hard number, but I can't remember off the top of my head what it is.
One went to the door, one went to the corner of the house on either side. So that's 3. Oh, it's 3 of them.
Okay.
3 of them. Okay.
Yeah. 3 black figures entered, like shades of night creeping across the ground. We get more of that horror stuff, whatever the riders approach. Yeah. And we do also get, in the book, unlike the movies, they actually talk. We get that, like, at one point in the movie, they say Shire, Frodo, and all that stuff, Baggins. But here they say, they're pounding on the door and they say, open in the name of Mordor.
Right. Yeah. Well, the Nazgul talk a lot more in the book than they do in the movie.
Yeah.
You rarely hear them speak in the movie, but in the book they do talk quite a bit, or more so than they do in the films. But yeah.
But yeah, with Fatty, it's like as soon as he saw the dark shapes creeping from the garden, he knew that he must run for it or perish, and run he did. And I guess, and then after that we go back,
right, and learn that they're that the room they were supposed to stay in got ransacked during the night.
Also, because
they stayed in a different room.
Yes,
because they knew that the Black Riders were there, thanks to Mary, And so they stayed in a different room, and they learned that the Black Riders, however many more are, in Bree, and attack them or try to attack them in the night.
Yeah. Then the interesting bit here is in the morning when they leave, like the townsfolk line up and like watch them leave.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess the Black Riders aren't going to be out during the day, but
Right.
it seems like that would have been an opportunity otherwise.
Well, yeah. So they set off for their journey, and they also learned that there's no horses to be found. All the horses have been driven out of the stables, so the only like pony or anything they can get is this half-starved, barely capable pony. And this is where we get introduced to the Bill, right? Bill the
Yeah.
pony.
Yeah. Named admirably after his owner, who was Bill Farney.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I love that he cut shade at the group on their way out, telling him to take care of his pony, and then Sam just decks his ass with an apple on the way out.
Yeah.
Which is nice.
Yeah. And this kind of like, again, these two chapters kind of bleed together like knife in the dark and Flight to the Ford. So really, this is where they start their journey to Rivendell, and they kind of go off the beaten path and go through the Wilderland towards Rivendell. A lot of this next chapter is just a lot of, or in between these two chapters is just a lot of description of them traveling.
Mm-hmm.
But then we get to, and I can't think of anything really that sticks out in my mind other than they get to Weathertop.
Yeah, really before then, there's not a whole lot. Like you said, it's just descriptions about 5 or 6 days of travel. That's just descriptions of this desolate land.
Yeah, I mean, it does, Tolkien does make a point here that they're traveling in haste. They're not stopping to rest as much as they would. They're not eating as much as hobbits would eat. But other than that, it's just really description of them traveling in haste through the Wilderland until they get to Weathertop.
Yeah, we do get Strider singing the song of Gil-galad.
Right. No, we do get that. That's a cool bit.
I had a note on the traveling. I just gotta find the atlas. You
Okay.
can talk now. I'll come back to it.
But yeah, he sings the Fall of Gil-galad and goes into the poem of that, and is it Sam that sings it?
I think I think you're right. I think it's Sam that sings it.
Yes.
And he learned it from Bilbo.
Yes.
Or he knew part of it.
No,
Is that correct? And then
yeah, Sam knew part of it a little bit.
Oh,
Aragorn finished it.
Aragorn finished it. That's what it
Yeah,
was.
And then later, when they're up there, Frodo is gonna tell a bit about what he knows,
Mhm.
but he starts going into like the dark stuff about Mordor, and Aragorn's like, not right now, not in the dark of night with the shadows.
Yeah, and again, bringing like, don't talk about scary, dark stuff at night. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
yeah.
So then he does Baron and Luthien.
Yes. Yeah.
But a note, before they start doing all that, when they make it up to Weathertop, they're up there and they find a campground.
Right.
That is presumably either Rangers or Gandalf or somebody. And they do
left
find
it behind.
yeah, it's a G3, presumably for Gandalf on the 3rd of October.
Mhm.
So they are kind of following his trail or something. It's not established. And then they make note that they see some Black Riders down below them, and Aragorn freaks out because he thinks they've been spotted. And this is where we learn that they can't see themselves, but their horses can.
Mhm.
Right. And we learn, we learn a little bit more lore here. We get a little bit more hints of lore, which is, again, the stuff. One of my favorite elements of Lord of the Rings is all these little just hints of they don't explain. Tolkien doesn't explain the full story to you, or if any of it, but he gives you these little hints that there's a wider world here and it's full of history. Of course, we get that through the songs and tales, but like in Weathertop, we get a tiny little bit of exposition about the Old Kingdom here. And that this was a watchtower built to protect against the Witch King and Angmar in elder days and whatever. But it's obviously long gone and ruined. But it's kind of a way spot for people traveling between here. The few that do, probably mostly just rangers, because there's probably I doubt that people of Bree are traveling through here, though maybe the elves and dwarves do. When they're traveling, because they do travel back and forth.
Yeah, the East Road does go right by like the bottom of Weathertop. So like if you were an elf traveling through or a dwarf, you would at the very least walk by this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So it's it's definitely a very prominent landmark here in this desolate landscape. But yeah, that little exposition there about Weathertop and what it is and why it's there is pretty cool.
Yeah, and then it makes mention of like the change in Aragorn's voice and like his tone and appearance when he's talking about the past, like where he was a gruff figure in Bree, and then when he's lamenting about these old times and stuff, he seems more regal and everything, just hinting at what's to come. It's a really nice little touch.
For sure.
And then Weathertop behind him as he's saying this as a kind of crown behind him as well. These really nice little flourishes.
Well, and there's a nice character moment after he sings the Baron and Luthien. It says that he sighed and paused before he spoke again. So it's just like, because the song, obviously is his history as well, or will be, I guess, his future. But just like knowing his own legacy and stuff, to just sing this long song and then he says, "That is a song," and like goes about it. But it gives this sadness, or more just like a melancholy to him in general, and we get to know there's more to him than just being this badass ranger stalking the woods.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, we learn now that we kind of got hints of that before, but now we know there's a lot more to him.
Yeah.
We learn more and more about him as it goes on.
Yeah.
So they stop for the night at Weathertop, and they know that the Black Riders are hot on their trail, and they see them there at the foot of Weathertop. And Strider goes off for a little bit to basically scout out the area. And this is where, the Black Riders attack them, the hobbits in the night.
Yeah, we get 5 of them. I was going to say we get 5 of them.
Okay,
that approach them. Yeah.
Yep.
And they're just shadowy, these shadowy figures. It's so dark up there, and their cloaks are so dark that they're not even like the shape of man or anything. They're just these shadowy figures that approach them.
Mm-hmm.
And then Frodo instantly, against his will almost, has an urge to put the ring on. He doesn't want to. Like, you have that bit of inner dialogue that he doesn't want to do this, but he does.
Yeah.
Because he can't help himself. But when he does, once he has it on, it's like he's out of that. And I forget the names that he calls out.
Elbereth and Githolian.
Yeah, and I think it's as if that empowers him to like attack. But of course, ultimately, he ends up getting stabbed in the shoulder. But before that happens, when the I guess it's the Witch King. That's the one that like approaches him, right?
Mm-hmm.
It mentions that this like shadow just moves past the rest of the hobbits. So, in the movie they present them with like this like clanging metal and stuff, but like in the book they're just like these quiet wraiths almost that to
Well-
move around, slink around, and stuff. So
And that's how they are in the Bakshi animated film. They're just cloaks,
that's true.
very
Yeah,
very fluid movement to them.
Yeah, well, I think Bakshi got a lot of the elements of the book
Mhm.
more correct than the Peter Jackson film.
Mhm.
He definitely tried. You could tell he tried very hard to get all those things
Mhm.
right. Just like Aragorn with the broken sword in the Bakshi film, he has the broken sword.
Mhm.
Stuff like that. And we haven't really talked a lot about the Lord of the Rings Ralph Bakshi movie, which I love that film. Almost as probably just as much, if not more, than the Peter Jackson film. It's unfortunate that we never got more of it, because that would have been awesome. But for what it was really cool.
Mhm.
yeah. I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch that. Definitely before our next stream, because it's been a long time since I've seen that.
It's definitely worth watching. It's really good. But anyways, yeah, they're on Weathertop. They get attacked by the Black Riders. Frodo gets stabbed.
Mhm.
But-
The description of the riders when he sees them in, I guess, like the Shadow Realm is really cool.
Yeah,
Like these like gray men having crowns and like all that stuff is a really visceral description of them.
and that's a part the movie got pretty right too.
It did a pretty good job with that, yeah.
Always thought they did a good job with that. When Frodo's got the ring on, looking at the Nazgul, he
Mhm.
what he's actually seeing is pretty spot on with the description in the book.
Mhm.
And then Aragorn kind of comes to the rescue, armed with a torch.
Yeah, they're just
I mean,
more.
it's not even a real torch. It's just like a piece of wood out of the fire, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
just even more of his badasses take on 5 of these things with a torch.
That is the reason why if I play a D&D game and I go anywhere, I'm going to have a lit torch with me, because you just never know. It worked for Aragorn.
Yeah, it's true.
It's always a good idea, yeah. So yeah, Aragorn, drives off the riders, and they flee into the night pretty much without hesitation.
Mhm.
And of course, now Frodo's like under the sickness and turning into a wraith.
Yeah.
And,
That happens much slower than what's presented, in the films. Because they still have, like, they say a fortnight's travel to Rivendell.
Yeah. Yeah.
And while they do huff it there, like, it's still days.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're only like halfway there, really.
Yeah.
If you look at the map, if I'm not mistaken, I'm saying that off memory of my map, from my head. Let me see if I'm actually right on that. Because I'm pretty sure it's only like halfway.
Yeah, no, they make mention that it's just halfway there. You're right on that. Actually, I have their travel map out in the Atlas book.
Yeah, actually, it's less.
It's less than half.
Yeah, it's less than halfway.
It's less than half. What happens is that they get backed up. They travel too far north, so it takes a couple more days.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting. He gets this numbing sensation in his arm and everything, but he's in relatively good spirits for the fact that he just got stabbed by Ringwraith.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like instant, like dying.
Right. And of course, Aragorn helps him however he can with some of his healing skills. We learned that Aragorn has really good, he's very skilled in healing and herbs and things. And other than that, again, it's just more exposition of travel.
Yeah.
Really. But now there's some like real urgency and darkness about it, because they're being actively, they know like the Black Riders aren't like a day off. They're like hot on their trail. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, before it was like they're kind of, they would catch up with them occasionally, but they were able to get away and have a little bit of head start on them. Now they're like hot on their trail, right? And it's a very hot pursuit, and feels very dire and urgent, because Aragorn knows that if they don't get Frodo to Rivendell as soon as possible, I don't know if he necessarily knows he's going to turn into a wraith. I don't know if that gets mentioned
Yeah, I don't
but
think
he
so. I
knows
think
that
it's just more of, yeah, he's likely gonna die.
yeah.
He is out of the realm of him being able to completely heal him.
Yeah. Well, and the Athelius plant
Yeah.
comes into much greater play later on, much later on in Return of the King,
Right.
with Faramir and all that. But
Well, we can talk about it a little bit because it was purposely put here, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
And I forget, like, he talks about how it's a plant that he's known from just wandering the wild and stuff, but the properties of it has more to do with the fact that he has king lineage, and healing like part of a king is, I guess, not to get into like terms of like masculinity or care and nurture and stuff like that, but part of a king is to like nurture your people and stuff, and this is one way that Aragorn is doing that by having these healing properties from the plant.
Sure.
Um,
Absolutely.
Yeah, and he says it's not of the area
right.
as
That's,
well.
yeah, that's kind of what I was bringing up. It's not native to here. It was brought
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, they continue on. They get over I think it's after they get over the last bridge that they encounter Glorfindel.
Yeah, and before then, but still after the bridge, when they're traveling, they travel off course too much. Like I said, go north too much.
Yeah.
And on their way back down, or maybe it might be on the way north, I'm not sure which, but they encounter some more ruins.
Oh, right.
And they're really curious. Merry and Pippin think that, did trolls build these? And Aragorn says, trolls built nothing. These are of, the old kingdoms and stuff. And they ask, how does he know this? How do you know these things? He says, I know my lineage.
Yeah, no, that's a really cool part. But there is, I think he mentions that trolls were living there, though.
Yeah, they were definitely living within there, because when they made their way through the ruins and came out on the other side, that's when they find Bilbo's troll
Exactly.
statues.
Yeah.
And it's a fun introduction that I forgot about. That they think that there's the trolls are there, and so Aragorn, being the protector, takes a stick with him and goes down there and like cracks one of them over the head, but it's stone, so it breaks. That's a really clever introduction to this thing you would be familiar with from the other book if you read it.
Right. Yeah. Well, and the other hobbits get the realization that, Bilbo wasn't full of shit.
Yeah.
This is exactly what he was telling us about. These are the trolls that, Bilbo and the dwarves, encountered, and we're going to, mash them up and turn them into jelly. And
yeah. And it's also a bit of levity for everybody as well, realizing that, we are on the same path that Bilbo took. Like,
right.
And, I think these four hobbits specifically, have a reverence for Bilbo, and being able to like walk in his footsteps again, kind of reinvigorate them to keep on this journey that they're on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, that's a good thing to bring up. It just slipped my mind there. But yeah, so then they get over the last bridge, and this is about the time they encounter Glorfindel, who's been sent out from Rivendell to find them, which he kind of makes mention that he's not probably the only one out there looking for him. It is interesting. They kind of give a description of Frodo's perspective of looking at Glorfindel.
Yes.
And that the elves are, he's glowing and he's bright and he's heavenly, which they kind of do this. Of course, in the movie, everybody knows this is different in the movie. It's Arwen that comes looking for him, but in the book, it's Glorfindel. But they do a good job of this in the movie. When Arwen rides up and you see this heavenly figure ride up, that's exactly how they describe Glorfindel in Frodo's eyes in the book. But again, in the book, it's Glorfindel. In the movie, it's Arwen, which I understand why they did that in the movie. That's fine. But Glorfindel is pretty cool, it seems like. He's definitely kind of interesting. And he's probably the first, like, regal noble elf, you know,
Mhm.
we meet, you know, I mean, because he's like an elven prince, you know, he's not just like some regular elf, even though all the elves are regal and whatever. He's, you know, he's an actual like noble elf. And then he's come looking for him, and he lets, you know, Frodo ride on his horse, and he's going to escort them to Rivendell. While they're getting, of course, not soon after,
Like immediately.
immediately, like the Nazgul are like come riding after him, and Glorfindel sends his horse off, you know, because the horse, this is no regular horse, this is an elven steed. And they, you know, again, here we go with like enchanted animals again.
Mhm.
This elf has been this horse has been influenced by the elves for a long time. So it's a little bit more sentient and a little bit more intelligent and has a little bit more, it's just a better horse, right? It's an enchanted horse, but it's been influenced and trained by the elves. And so, you know, this horse knows exactly its way back to Rivendell. It doesn't need a rider to tell it what to do. It knows what to do, you know,
Yeah.
because Frodo can't do shit really at this point.
Yeah.
And he's looking over his shoulder and can see the Nazgul riding behind him. It's pretty much, you know, how the movie does it, except for, you know, in the movie, Arwen is doing the riding and Frodo's on the horse with her. But it's pretty close to, you know, how the movie shows it.
Yeah.
I don't know
and-
if there's. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say at this point they're back on the main road. They're finally on the main road.
Yeah, they're
as
on the
well.
main road again. Yes, once they got to the last bridge and they're on the road.
Well, and Frodo does get, like, I guess, a sense of courage at the end of this, even though he can't do anything. You know, he gets, when they're, you know, kind of at the crossing with the water there. I mean, he stands up and turns back and tells the
he pulls out his
riders,
sword.
pulls out the sword, tells them go back to the land of Mordor. And it says that his own voice sounded thin and shrill in his own ears, but I mean, he's still doing it regardless. And then, of course, the riders halt and they just laugh at him.
Well, and they
Um,
tell him, they laugh at him and they mock him and say, you know, no, come back with us to the land of Mordor.
Yes, yeah,
Again, we hear the Nazgul talk, which in the movie they do talk too, but they say something completely different. You know, it's like some cheesy thing. You know, Arwen say, "Come and get him," and
yeah, come and claim him and all that stuff.
yeah. Which, in the book, it's way cooler.
Yeah.
Because it's Frodo, you know, doing all that.
Yeah, well, and Frodo,
Um,
again, using... I mean, he just learned of Luthien, but he says by Elbereth and Luthien the Fair.
Mhm.
Just the power of those elven names.
Yeah, the power of words again,
Yes.
which does have an effect here.
Yeah. And then he's lifting up his sword. He says, you shall have neither the ring nor me. And, of course, then that's when the riders start to cross the ford, and then
Right.
the
And-
water starts foaming.
Yeah, which is this scene I've always loved in the books and in the movies and whatever. But of course I used it as the picture of this stream where Frodo's pointing the sword at the Nazgul. There's a cool like painting I found of that. There's a bunch of really cool art. That's one that like sticks out in everybody's mind. A lot of artists have done really good portrayals of it. Probably some of the best like artistic portrayals I've seen in anything in Lord of the Rings is from that scene at the Ford of Brunnen.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, Frodo's pointing the sword at him and very weakly saying all this. And then, of course, it's not completely clear, but I'm pretty sure it's the elven magic protecting the land and Frodo speaking these words, and the water comes rushing forth and forms into actual like white horses and basically sweeps the black riders away as they're crossing the ford.
Mhm.
And that's pretty much where, you know, book one of Fellowship of the Ring ends.
And a great ending, too.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic like note to end on. It's like so much has been building to this point. And again, we've talked about this before that, you know, it's this great building, you know, it's a slow build, but it's a good build.
Yeah.
Of tension and darkness. And now we've come to this culmination of all that here at the end of the first book of Fellowship of the Ring. and it really paid off. It's exciting. Like these last chapters, when you're reading them, you can't stop reading them. You're just like, oh
Mhm.
shit, what's going to happen? And especially this part, like the flight to the ford. It's really exciting, and it really pays off. And and that darkness is really creeping in, and then light overcomes that, of course.
Yeah.
I've always been interested in the water, though, and I think it's explained a little bit, and I can't remember. Of course, we'll find out more in the next chapter. But I remember Elrond and Gandalf talk about it in the next chapter when, or we're not going to spoil it too much, but when Frodo is recovering, what exactly happened there? Like, is that something like Elrond did? Like he can sense the presence of what's in his realm, or is that something that's just this is an ancient magic that the elves placed over the land, and if there's a threat of darkness and evil, it just awakens itself? Or is this something Gandalf did? I think Gandalf does mention that he had he mentions that he had a part to play with making the horses.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of makes me think that Elrond did that.
Mm-hmm.
Like he knew Frodo was there and needed help, and he was the one that summoned the waters. Or did Frodo do it? Like I don't. It's not 100% like clear there. Obviously Gandalf knew, because he says something about he made the horses. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm remembering more of it. I think Elrond, when Gandalf's talking about that, he pretty much says that Elrond is the one that did it. If I'm not mistaken, we'll find out next chapter. But anyways, that whole bit about the the magic waters at the Ford of Brunnen and how that happened is really, really interesting and fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, I don't really have anything else to say. What were we going to say?
Well, I was just going to say it is. I mean, with this being the end of book one, and us not knowing that information yet, but with it seeming like that Frodo is the one doing it just by his actions, it is said at the beginning that Gandalf and Bilbo see Frodo as the brightest of the hobbits out of all of the Shire.
Yeah.
And there is, something to him. So, until next time when we actually learn that, I guess us as the reader, it's like, yeah, Frodo did that.
Well, it'd be easy to assume with him having all of these like dreams of, as a first-time reader, you don't know what they are. You don't know if they're premonitions of the future or, thoughts of the past or what it may be. But just like he's having these like,
there's something up with it.
Yeah. And just
and
just the power of word throughout and singing and stuff throughout all of this. It's easy that, that those elven names could easily evoke, nature just to like take over and wipe out some darkness as well.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll find out more about that. I can't remember exactly. They talk about it.
Yeah.
In the next chapter, and we'll learn more about it.
Yeah. I wanted to point out there, like I said, I had the atlas. It has a breakdown of like their travels through this and like how many days and miles.
Oh, yeah.
They did. So they actually traveled further in less time before they got to Bree.
Mm-hmm.
But it was more scattered. Like they traveled and just the mileage in general is wild. Like, when they left Bag End, they were told to stay off the road.
Well, do you have the actual numbers there?
Yeah.
Okay, well, tell us the numbers, because I'm interested.
Traveling off the road was traveling 18 miles out of the way, away from the road, down into the forest, which is like, I talked about this with Vince earlier. Like, where I'm at, I'm less than a mile away from the interstate, but you can't see it. Like, I'm well away from it, though. So, like, the fact that they just traveled, like, so far away. But I think you made a point that, they were still wanting to see the Shire and kind of get into Creek Hollow and stuff like that. But their travels from Bree out, they traveled 16 miles a day, like almost exactly, for for about 6 days to Weathertop, with 16 miles a day. So it was pretty consistent. I guess that being with Strider, instead of before it was 18 miles for the first day, 28 miles, 27, 25 miles, 17, 20. So it was kind of more all over the place.
Yeah.
Not being like, well experienced, travelers. But then getting with Strider is very consistent throughout the rest of their travels.
So does it give a total how much they've traveled so far? Because that's actually kind of interesting.
Yeah, if y'all talk about something else for a second, I can just get my phone out and add it all up. It doesn't have an exact total just written out, but
No, because I've never really calculated that or anything. That would be really interesting to know, or maybe we can just save that for next time at the beginning of the thing. We can kind of sum up things and talk about the
Well,
total
I had
mileage, because
I had seen a map somewhere online. It was correlating, their journey from the Shire to Mordor, and it stuck the mileage on the United States. And it was basically traveling from, I want to say, like, it'd be the equivalent of the Appalachian Mountains to, like, greater than Texas. Like, going, like, it was they trekked by foot quite a bit. Like, and I know you and me were talking about hiking earlier today.
Yeah.
Like, just doing, a few miles here and there. But, hearing that they would travel 20 miles in a day, like, that's
a long ways to go.
that. Yeah. And they weren't on a path. They were, now, granted, some of that they had ponies, but not much of it.
Yeah. Well, we can find it. We can find it next time, Andy. But
yeah, I give or take 424 miles so far.
I mean, that's fucking long ways.
Well,
Yeah.
to put it in perspective, coming from northern Kentucky down to here is only like 240 miles, and that's a 5 or 4 hour drive. So that's
Yeah, I mean that's a
well,
lot.
that's there and back again for me. Like, that's
Yeah. Well, it's funny, they had the horses from the Barrows to Bree, and that was only 20 miles. That was their shortest amount of travel almost when they were actually on ponies.
So Sergeant Dan brings up a good point. The longer distance earlier are because they know the Shire and make more time? ?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I would think so.
I would think, because Pippin is wanting to go.
He wants to go to an inn.
He wants to go to an inn to get drunk, and
Yeah.
And their shortcut to Farmer Maggots is not really a shortcut.
Yeah, and even like in the old forest, they've been there before. Like, some of them have been there, if not all of them, and they know the way.
Yeah.
They know their way around these parts. You know what I mean? Like, it's not completely foreign to them. So yeah, I think Sergeant Dan's right. Like, it's familiar territory to them, and they've trekked through some of these places before. So, and I forget who it is in the old forest that's leading them through the old forest. Is it Mary?
It's Mary. Yeah.
And Mary's like been here, and he knows like the roads and like the paths and which way not to go and which way to go and all that stuff. So Chris said, after the old forest, who wants to get drunk and I don't drink? Yeah, absolutely. But anyways, yeah, I'm glad some people are joining us now at the very end here. But hey, thanks for joining us. Anyways, watch the replay if you didn't watch the whole thing. And I've definitely been enjoying these talks and reading Lord of the Rings again. Always a good time to read Lord of the Rings. What do we got coming up? Tentatively, we have Prowlers and Paragons Sunday, correct?
I believe so. Yeah.
Is that correct? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm losing track of time here, but I think that's correct.
This past week went by quick, so yeah.
Yeah. So as long as Todd's in, we're going to be playing Prowlers and Paragons Sunday. What else we got going on? Of course, I'm going to be always do one video a week, and that's no different from this week. I'm not sure what kind of video I'm going to be making. I've got a lot of ideas. But I'll be doing a video by myself, as I always do, talking about some old role playing game or whatnot. Actually, what I'll probably be doing is a review of Star Trek Adventures. Since I have a
Nice.
PDF copy of that now too, and been wanting to do a proper actual review. I don't do many reviews on the channel, but that's a game I've been wanting to talk about and do an actual review of. And of course, Tuesday I'll be playing in Bears game. I think everybody here knows that. We'll be continuing Star Trek Sojourner, where I'll be playing Dr. Jeb Taylor, and that's going to be a lot of fun. We're actually going to get into an actual adventure. Last time was just session 0. This will be session 1. And of course, later on in the week, Wednesday, I'll be on the Four Color Cafe again. And yeah, that's about all that's coming up this week. Lots of things that I'll be involved in. It'll be really good. And thanks a lot for tuning in. And we will see you guys next time.
See you.
See ya.